My name is Kate. I am a Houston Holocaust Museum volunteer, and I study the Holocaust, mainly Jewish teens and children. But the thing that really separates me from other volunteers and other people my age who study this is that I am autistic.
I need some love now, love now. I thought you were the home run, hit a home run, holding my heart like it's beating my heart like it's beating.
When my heart on my sleeve is 100 degrees, I can feel everything, yeah. Yeah, I got a confession, I'm feeling under pressure, wish I had all the answers, yeah. When my heart on my sleeve, they all say I'm naive, but it's better than nothing. When did it all get so heavy now? What about me? No, don't forget me. Me. What about me?
Autism is a disability. For me, it's something that I struggle with on a daily basis. Some people have special interests, and for me, it's the Holocaust, particularly the Holocaust diaries and the teens and children. But today is museum day. Time to get my clothes on, get my books, and get ready for the day. I'm all ready to go. Got my books, kissed my husband goodbye, and off I go to the museum. I volunteer on Tuesdays, almost every Tuesday. I have been volunteering for a year. I started in April of 2022, and now it'll be a year. I am now put in the diary exhibit exclusively, and the reason this being is because I am their diary historian. I also study the lives of Jewish teens and children from the Holocaust, either survivors or the ones that have perished. But I think that the diaries, to me, speak more than anything else. And I'd like to talk about a few of these diarists that I feel like their voices are needed now more than ever.
So Mary Berg, you probably have never heard that name before, but I can assure you the woman is not only a legendary figure in Holocaust history, especially in Holocaust diary history, but a very complex woman as well. As you'll see in our research, she is very, very complicated. Mary Berg's diary was published in February of 1945 to the American public. It was actually published in kind of a series in S.L. Schneiderman's newspaper. It was translated into Yiddish and was published in the Yiddish newspaper. But then it was published in an English newspaper in the evening edition of the Evening News, until L.B. Fisher decided to publish the diary for the American public for the first time. Now, her diary was a pretty big hit, I would say. It was the first Holocaust diary to ever be published in the United States. Well, Mary Berg decided that she would do some publicity for it between the years of 1945 all the way up to 1949. Well, in 1950, it's like Mary Berg decided to go AWOL. She's gone. Nobody knows why. Nobody understands what happened or what was the meaning or the purpose behind it. In 1958, the editor, and technically the collaborator, Mr. S.L. Schneiderman, wrote her a letter in 1958 stating that he would want to reissue the diary and make sure it will never go out of print. But of course Mary was against this, and Mary had arguments with him. And he wrote to her and he basically said, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to invoke my right of paragraph 7, whatever paragraph 7 was, in the contract. And he decided to reissue the diary. But in 2005, actually, let's go a little bit backwards, more back. In 1992, a professor by the name of Susan Pentland decided that she would like to republish the diary for students to use. And ultimately, she decided to write Mr. Schneiderman, and he said, of course, I'll get you in touch with Mary. No problem. Well, that didn't go over too well. Well, in 1992, when Susan Pentland wrote her letter, a beautiful letter to Mary, saying that she would love to republish the diary for future generations to read, Mary's response was not that cuddly. Let me read. She writes a big no. Now you might ask, why would she do this when, this is for educational purposes and for students and for many, many people to read this later on in life because, they didn't want her story to be forgotten. According to her, she thinks Susan is self-serving, satisfying her ego, and feelings of self-serving importance is pathetic, according to her. And she says, instead of continuing to milk the Jewish Holocaust to its limits, do go and make a difference in all these Holocausts taking place right now in Bosnia or Chechnya. Or have you no sympathy for all the Muslims being slaughtered? Now, I understand where she's coming with this. Sometimes, actually, especially in the 90s, there were a lot of genocides happening in Rwanda and in Bosnia and other places in Europe and in the Middle East, particularly in the Middle East or East Africa, or in Africa in that matter. But people are still talking about the Holocaust because anti-Semitism is still here. And unfortunately, with the rise of anti-Semitism and Jewish hatred, it is very important that we have stories like Mary's diary to be shown. But would she appreciate it now? What would she think about it now? The world could only know. Anyway, she says, by teaching about the Holocaust, you'll stop at something in the future, right? You'll stop its occurrence in the future, right? But the future is now. When the Jews were victimized, they wanted the world to serve them? I don't know if that says save them. Maybe save them. I can't really read her writing. The Israelis dripping, I don't know what that says, on the surf to save the Bosnian Muslims. Oh, are the Israelis dipping books, I guess, or boats on the Serb to save the Bosnian Muslims? But don't tell me this is different. So by misreading my privacy, your request is denied, MP. I can't really read her writing, bless her heart. She's got beautiful writing, I just can't read it. Anyway, let me read you the letter that the publisher, or the editor, should I say, S.L. Schneiderman, had wrote to her in July of 1958. He writes, "Dear Mary, I have been pondering at your arguments against reissuing the Warsaw Ghetto," her diary, basically. "They are all negative, and you can hardly expect any sympathy for them." Oh, he's getting Betty. "Particularly from Jewish and even non-Jewish liberal-minded people. What he's saying now is the book is important and we want future generations to read it. We want people to hear the story and we want people never to forget it." That's what he's saying. "Besides all this, you have not shown the slightest consideration for me personally and the tremendous effort I have put into that book. I feel it is my moral obligation to make this book available for the Polish reader as a book of highly educational value concerning anti-Semitism. Therefore, I have decided to use my legal right in accordance with paragraph 7 of our contract, and have advised the Warsaw publisher of my approval and intend also to do the same with the British publisher. Of course, the 50% royalties due to you in accordance with the contract will be kept for you. I have discovered in my files a fascinating letter of Julian Tuvim about Warsaw Ghetto, which will be used for the preface. Of course, if you wish to see the text of my revised preface, I will be glad to send it to you as soon as I have it completed. I hope you will have a change of heart." Yes, basically a change of heart. "And will be pleased by this development. I was glad to see your husband, and he was very understanding about the matter we discussed. Please give him my best. Yours sincerely, S.L. Schneiderman." Basically, he's saying, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't care. I'm going to publish this book whether you like it or not. Period. Social period. Thank God he did. These books have been published 3 times. It was published in 1945, Warsaw Ghetto. It was reissued, and let me just double check to make sure when this issue was. 2007. So, a professor by the name of Susan L. Pentland decided that she wanted to reissue the diary for further educational use. But we'll back that up a little bit before, since S.L. Schneiderman also wanted to reissue the diary for personal use, for educational personal use as well. And he wrote to Mary in 1958, after she decided that in 1950 she'd stop talking about the diary and stop talking about the Holocaust altogether, that he said he was going to invoke his moral right of paragraph 7, whatever paragraph 7 was in the contract, to reissue the diary. Was she happy about that? We'll never know. But anyway, in 1992, Susan L. Pentland reached out to Schneiderman and she said, "Hey, I'd like to get in touch with Mary to republish the diary." And he said, "Stat, I can get you in contact with her, no problem." Well, Susan wrote this beautiful letter to Mary stating how much this book has meant to her and her students and how she wants more and more people to read this story for future generations. But what I love most about this collection is that it just shows Mary, and of course her family and friends, but it just shows just how real she was. I mean, she was real, obviously. I mean, there's no doubt. But, I mean, look at this face. I mean, look at this cute, adorable face. Good God, she's just so cute. And then there must be her mom, and there she is. And then I think that's her sister. One of the things I love about Mary, especially in these pictures, is that she just looks like she's having a fun time here in the States and being a teenager. But Mary, as we find out, is a very complicated and very complex Holocaust survivor.
Before we actually talked first. And I think what he said is that you kind of have to separate her from the book and separate her from the personal life, because if you're going to try to do both, you're going to be miserable. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I think so. But I think what we're trying to figure out now is kind of try to present her in a way that people would want to read the diary or get interested in it, because it's a great diary. but of course there's this whole mystery behind her because she was a great part of it from what Ben told me, and like when it came out she was very much involved, and then in 1950 or 52 it's like she didn't want any part of it anymore. And that's kind of, it's weird, and I don't know what happened. I don't know why. And I asked Ben if they had any fallout between SL and her, and he said, I can't think of anything. And I'm like, okay. But what have you have heard of why she kind of wanted to separate herself? Any idea why?
So my friend's mother, Wanda Bonar was her maiden name.
Mm-hmm.
She basically said so she's 94, and they said, why didn't you participated, that your family participated in putting up a marker to the grandparents that we know you loved, because there's pictures of you being hugged by them as a kid. Like, we know you were close. Why, knowing all of this, did you not tell us all these years? And her eyes got a little teary, apparently. And she basically said, what happened to them was so awful. We never talked. We knew what had happened to my mother's parents was so awful that we didn't talk about it. I think Mary Berg had some. It must have been something like a breakdown.
Yeah, probably. I think it got to the point. Yeah, I think it got to a point because Anne's diary came in 52 over here. So I think she might have seen that and was like, okay, Anne will get all the glory. That's fine. I can have a break. But I think with Anne's diary being, because I think in 52 was when she kind of said, I don't want to do this anymore. I think when she saw Anne's diary, or at least it kind of re-brought up a lot of trauma, I think, for her. And knowing a lot of survivors, they say that there's something called generational trauma, that the trauma from our past can pass on to the children. Yeah. And I think that's what her daughter was trying to say, is that, though I guess maybe she might have asked questions, maybe Mary was not, maybe she was still bitter about it. That's how I look at Mary, is that she was very, very bitter about something that was, I don't think she realized, maybe because, I'm trying to remember the woman who wrote to her, who got their diary republished, Susan something.
Oh, Susan, and it was a similar name. It was like Susan Pentlin or something.
Yes, yes. According to Ben, lovely, lovely lady. She has passed, unfortunately, as well. But I think what Mary didn't realize, I guess now, is that it's become it's an educational document now. Do we know where the diaries are now? No, they're probably gone. And sadly, we'll never get to see what her diaries actually said or what the manuscript might have said. But at least we have this. We have it. So I think now, because it'll actually, I was going to tell you, Ben and I are actually republishing it with One World Publication.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, they're going to be publishing it in 2025. As soon as we emailed them about it, they were on board.
ימים יפים, פרנוס הסגית, אפילו חופשה לפעמים. ילדים מביאים לנו נחת לרוב, כולם בריאים, יש שמחות מדהים לראות איך הכל מסתדר ושום דבר לנו לא חסר. ורק בזמן שקשה נביט למעלה, למה שלא נבין שהוא אחראי גם לנו, הוא את הכל ברא, לטוב ולא לרע, הוא האלוקים, הוא מלך מלכי המלכים. Ain't no milvado, 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 ain't no. הכל זורם, אז תתבונן, תראה מיד את living your dreams. But when it all goes bust at the seams, then you scream and cry to the one on high. He's been it from the beginning when you felt like you were winning. He was calling all the shots, he gave you all that you got. So when you're low, just you know he's up above and down below. So shout it out aloud with me, let's go. Ain't no river, I can't hear you. Sing it, oh. Ain't no river, ain't no river, ain't no river, break it down now. Ain't no river, ain't no river, ain't no river, ain't no, oh. Ain't no river, ain't no river, ain't no river, ain't no, oh.
Enjoy, and yours, love, Tammy. Which I responded, my heart is breaking for you and your beautiful family. If you need anything, please let me know. Hava meant so much to me, and I will always be thinking of you. Please let me know if there's anything you need. So, in the museum, I volunteer every Tuesday. And Hava's picture with her brother Peter, is there all the time, so I always took pictures. This is one of my favorite photos of Hava. Here's a better version of that photo. This is when they were real young. Hava was 92. This is a beautiful photo of Hava. I love that picture of her. Oh yeah, I have that. I repeat a lot. Oh, so this is Hava and Peter. She looks like a little boy here, doesn't she? But no, that's her and Peter, and they were out on some lake or something having a good time, probably in the summer when they were babies. She had that photo, actually. She always kept that photo. And there's the museum. When Hava was alive, I would always take a picture of this for her. And I would say, look, there you are. There you are in the museum. But let's see, let's get to a good picture. This is her brother's thing. So as you can see, a lot of it, so when you click on that screen, this is what pops up. Now they'll have to redo this biography on them because Hava is no longer here. This is their family. This is her mother, her father, Peter, and there's Hava. Hava's real name, or should I say English name, was Eva Ginzova, and she was Czech, but she lived in Israel for the past 50 years. She raised her children there. Israel was her home, and she really was a sweet woman, I'll tell you. I miss her so much. It's really sad when you lose a Holocaust survivor, I'll tell you, because it's like part of our history is slowly dying. Part of that history is slowly dying, and there's nobody else left to talk about it, or we'll talk about it. There's them, the Czech streets, and I love their outfits. It's really cool that people don't dress like this anymore, but
my God, this woman. Look, I have the same picture. Oh, my favorite picture. Oh, there's her when she was just a baby. It's the cutest little baby. She's so cute. So she was born in February. Actually, her and Pater were born in the same month. Pater was born February 1st, 1928. She was born the February 21st, 1930. And then she left, and there's little Hava right there in the baby carriage, and there's Petter, oh, so excited, having a new baby sister. And there's a photo of them together. I think that's the most known photo of them together. You know, I once asked her, once upon a time, if talking about her brother, who didn't survive the Holocaust, if that was painful for her. And she told me in the most sweetest way, she said, it was very painful at first, but now he gives me strength to talk about him. And I think the world should know, because it was such a loss for me, not knowing him as an adult, and I think all mankind lost out. And I would agree. And there's Hava, Mom, Pater. Cute little, oh, look at his little lederhosen. Oh, he's so cute. So sweet. And yeah, it's funny to see the height difference between him. So Petter must have been very tall, and then Hava was kind of short. And then here's the picture. Petter is pretty tall, and there's their family. This is a very lovely family photo. I think this was taken right before the Nazis invaded the Czech Republic in 1939. But this is how I will always remember Hava, smiling, and there's Peter, and here's some family pictures. Here's Ava, or Hava, and there's Hava. It's funny, I'll call her Hava and then I'll call her Ava in between, but mostly she's Hava to me. This is my favorite photo of Hava of all time. I have this in every book that I ever have written about Hava. I put it in every article that I've ever written about the woman. It's my favorite photo, and I'll tell you why. Because it's one of the very few the few that I've seen of them together, and it's just a very cute photo. I love her little smile anyway. But it's one of my personal favorites. And it's one of the photos that I've been able to see and post and share. And personally, it's just a very amazing photo. I think I have like 3 copies of this, so that's not a good photo. There we go. There's Hava and Peter, and they're in the countryside. Oh, this is cute. I love little Hava's face. That's the vibe. That's the vibe of a 5-year-old. I feel like that is an absolute vibe. Like, that's my vibe, man. I get it. But I first met Hava in 2011. It was February. I think it was right after her birthday, and I was doing research on Peter. Or Petter, as I call him, Peter. Petter is she pronounced it Peter or Peter. And I asked her some questions, and then I asked her about herself, and then I asked if I could, check in just to make sure she's okay, and she said yes. So we talked for a couple more years, and then I think she told me she wasn't feeling all that well, so she wouldn't have time to respond, sadly. And then when I was writing my book, which was then Lives That Mattered, which turned into Among the Many, which you can buy, I wanted to include Hava as one of the survivors because she was still here at the time. And I got in touch with her beautiful family, her daughter especially, Tammy, and she was she's just been so sweet, I'll tell you, and so lovely to me. And she always gave me updates about Hava, and
and she's always been so gracious. They've all been so gracious about giving me updates on Hava and how she was doing, and you know, for Tammy, she basically said it's not looking good. And I always thought that if you prayed and if you wished and hoped to God that a miracle would happen, she'd get better, but it didn't seem that way. And then it was September 24th, 2022 at 10 p.m. at night, my time. She gave me the news of Hava had passed away. This was a commission that I had done for one of the books that I'm writing now. And the guy who did this was a guy named Shane McCormick, and he's a wonderful Irish artist who does amazing things with photos. And so I asked him to, so the overlay right now, the overlay that you see is Hava's handwriting from her diary in Terezin. So Hava was deported to the Terezin ghetto of May of 1944, and she was 14. And she wrote about her time that she suffered in Terezin, her hunger, her diseases, her worry for Petter and everything. And the last time she ever saw Petter alive. Here's the main the full version of the because I think when I went back to the museum that first time after she passed, oh God, it was so hard to go into that exhibit knowing her picture was there and having to talk to students and saying, I'm sorry, but Hava had just passed away. It was so hard for me. Like, it was so, like, I broke down, like, twice because I just could not bear the fact that Hava was gone. I don't take death lightly. I'm autistic. I don't take death lightly. I never have and I never will. Her death was no different. I broke down and I sobbed so hard. I broke down. And so in the exhibit, here's Hava and here's Peter, the famous photo that everybody knows and loves. And so, and also she's on this touch screen as well. And when you press on it, you get to read her diary and things of that nature. Oh, here's the cover that of the book that I'm working on. And as you can see, that famous photo that I really, really love. This one. I think this will always be one of my favorite photos of Hava. I think her lasting legacy was, you know, it is always important to discuss the past and never forget it, and people who are, you know, who don't learn from it are doomed to repeat it, and all that what she taught me. But she was in a great documentary about Peter, or Petter as I call him. And she was there and she discussed a lot of Peter and what he was like and things like that. So it's really sad that we don't have her here now, but I'm glad, to me, that I can be at peace that she's not suffering as she was for a long time, and she was suffering for a very, very long time. Okay. Oh my God. This is one of the sweetest photos I have of her. And she's holding the picture that I love so dearly. But every time I go into the museum now, I always take a photo. All the time. I take a photo of her and I send it to Tamar and I say, this is what I remember now. This is what I have. So this is what you read when you click on her. I have a lot of pictures of her initially. There's her and her brother. People say they look a lot alike. And I would say they were. But I think the most thing that I will remember about her was her kindness. She was always so sweet and always so encouraging. She said to me, "It's not every day I get a young person that wants to study the Holocaust." And I said, "Well, I'm different than most young people. I'm very, very different. And I will always be..." This is one of the last known photos of Hava before she got really sick. And she looks really cute. And she's just this adorable little old lady. But she had been through so much, especially during the Holocaust, and she had to rebuild her life without Petter, which was an incredible loss for her. But she didn't let it bother her, at least with me, it seemed. She didn't let it bother her, but I know it must have. I know it must have bothered her so much. So whenever I was designing the book cover, I made sure she was on the cover. This is one of the main photos that people like to use of Peter because it's a beautiful family photo, and there's Hava. Some people like to crop this out. This is where that photo that was colored came out. It cropped out. And there's the picture. Again, I think I have like 3 or 4 versions of this photo. I mean, it's the same photo, but it's just big, small, different colors. And that's all I will remember about her. How much she was so sweet, and she meant a lot to me. She still does. I mean, she's never gone. She will never be gone from me, I tell you. She is always here with me. But I think this holiday season, especially for Hanukkah, will hurt. I think every holiday will hurt, without her. Yom HaShoah, I always told her I was thinking of her. And she would always say, "Oh, you're very sweet, you're very kind, and you're always remembering everything. What do you gain out of this?" I said, "Well, I don't, because what I do is I want to remember people. I want to give you a voice." So now Hava is giving me the opportunity to never forget. Never forget. That's what she teaches me every day. And there's Hava with 2 of her friends, and she's wearing the star. Let's see what other photos I have of this woman. Yeah, there she is right there. There's her when she was real little. There's Petter. There's her dad. And there's me at the museum, and of course there's there. This is pandemic, I guess. So, and then the rest apparently are not her, but anyway. Oh, this is her. I think this is the Christmas, 5th of December, I want to say, 1937. And this was her ice skating. Let me see if we can zoom in. There we go. Look at that little face. She never changed. She looked the same when she got older, but she was so cute. And her artwork, wow, her artwork is amazing. I mean, I've looked at some of it, and it's just incredible. I love it. I love it. I love it. She will always be one of my. I think with the survivors that I've known, Hava is definitely one of the top 5 that I've loved for years. As she was one of the very first that I ever spoke to. It was Peter Feigl, it was Renee Kahn-Silver, and then it was Hava. It was Hava, I think she was the 3rd one. So she meant so much to me, and she always will. I have these. I know you probably recognize some of these because Hava and Peter are together. But Peter is, or Peter as I call him, is a very important boy to discuss. He really is. He was a wonderful artist who did amazing art and who wrote wonderful stories and things of that nature. Oh, look at his little lederhosen. It's so cute. There's Hava looking all adorable. Peter was born on the 1st of February, 1928. And he was born in Prague, in the Czech Republic. And Prague is now one of the most beautiful, like one of the most famous cities in the Czech Republic. It's probably the capital, if I'm not mistaken. There's baby Peter! He's so cute. Look at his little clothes. He's so cute. So there's his dad, there's his mom, there's him. And look how tall he is, you know. So he began his diary in the spring, or I guess in the spring of 1941. Or no, he didn't, not in the spring, I'm sorry, in September of 1941. I lied. He had 2 diaries before he was deported to Terezin in 1942. And then he wrote a Terezin diary between the years of 1942 to 1944, or 1943 to 1944. And with Peter, his diaries never really express his feelings, really. He talks about what he did during the day, especially his older diaries. He talked about, you know, what was going on in the world at the time, and then he would write some of his short stories or poems in his diaries. These photos are very lovely, are very wonderful, because it shows what his family was like, how family came first. You know what I mean? Family was important to him, and Hava it was too, and it'll always be with Hava. Peter, this was a very interesting photo of him because he wasn't smiling. And I think for him, he probably was not in a good mood, or he probably knew that his deportation was coming, and he was probably really worried. But according to Hava, he never talked about it, he never discussed it. While he was in the Terezin ghetto, he contributed to, and basically wrote and published and illustrated an underground magazine called Vedem. And Vedem basically means we lead, or we are leading in Czech. And it was done by a couple boys in his barrack. And they would ask other boys to contribute some satire, some poetry, some stories, anything they could do. And he would bind all these magazines, and he would pass them around to the ghetto, but they were never caught. For if they were caught, they would have been murdered immediately on the spot. So this is again my favorite photo of Peter. And there's the most known one of Peter with the family. It's the one that people tend to use all the time. And Peter, unfortunately, was murdered at Auschwitz at age 16. He was just a teenager. But his diaries were saved by some miraculous miracle. And Hava published them. This is also one of my favorite photos of Peter. I don't know if he's holding a frog. I don't know if he's holding anything, but according to Hava, he was a very scientific boy. He loved the sciences, and he loved to draw, and he loved nature. And you can tell in this photo. Yeah, there's him, his cute little outfit. There's him and his dad. There's Peter and Hava and his mom out on a bridge near a lake or a river in the Czech Republic. Let's see, I know I've got other pictures of him. Let's see. So Petter is actually located twice in the Houston Holocaust Museum. He's located once in the diary exhibit, which I exclusively see him every Tuesday. So I always take a snapshot. And he is located by the library, which is really cool. So a lot of people don't know that Ilyan Raman, who was an astronaut, wanted to go to space, and he wanted to take something from the Holocaust with him. And Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum in Israel, gave him a copy of Petter's drawing Moon Earth, I think is what it was called. And let's see here. Let's see, yeah. This was also done by Shane McCormick. And it was a beautifully done photo. It was basically the photo that was of him and Hava, and he basically cut Hava out. And it's just Peter, and you can see Petter's handwriting. And there's Petter. It's not a very good photo quality, but it is him. And there's him when he was a lot younger. And there's him and Hava on the board here with Peter Feigl and Elizabeth Kaufman Koenig, Klaus Langer, Yitzhak Rudashevsky, and one of my personal faves, Otto Wolff. Peter Feigl, who's a very dear friend of mine, and I love him dearly. Oh, it's small. There's Petter as well. See, that's the most known photo that people use on social media. There's him. There's him. This is the picture that Hava used for the book. And I think she used it because it really embodies what he was about. And of course there's Hava there. And there he is, enjoying life. There's him and Hava, and they are always out in nature enjoying themselves. And here's the picture that was colorized, so they just cut Hava out of that photo. And here's Petter will show up in books sometimes. He will. So down here, this is his art. So you can see that he did what his art looked like, what his room looked like in Terezin. It says Petter was transported to Auschwitz in 1944, where he was gassed at the age of 16. The diary of Petter Ganz was published in 2007. Actually, it was published in 2004, but give or take a couple of years. Peter was a talented writer, illustrator, and illustrator. Yes, he was. So, and there's him. When I went to the museum for the first time, I took a lot of pictures, and then let's see. Here's him looking kind of confused. I don't know how this photo was taken, but it was taken on the streets. And there's Peter and there's Hava. Let's see. This is a very good photo. I think this is the same photo that Hava used for his page of testimony at Yad Vashem. Page of testimony basically meant a death certificate. So she basically said, he died and all that. But I think Peter's death was really a tragedy, honestly, because he was one of the 1.5 million Jewish teens and children that were murdered. We could have gotten great things from him. I feel that if he would have survived, we would have gotten great things from him. I think he would have been a great illustrator. I think he would have been a great writer. I think he would have found the cure to diseases like cancer or COVID, believe me. I think he would have found the cures for that. And then here's his stone here. In the Czech Republic and in Europe, there are things called stuples or stoppels. I forgot what they're called, stools or something. Basically, they're stones of Holocaust victims, and and people put them down, who they are. And so Peter Ganz, there's his right there. Let's see. A lot of it's Hava, because Google thinks that Hava and Peter are the same person. Here's the photo that's one of the very first photos I ever saw of Petter, and I think it's a very good photo. It's not a very clear one, but it's the same photo that, you know, he was smiling in. It's from this photo shoot. And there's him when he was real little. And there's the photo that everybody knows and loves because, you know, it's such a famous photo, you know. Such a famous photo. I think the world lost out on him. I think the world really did. You know, I think Hava had to grow up without her brother, which I think was really difficult for her, but she managed to, you know, have her own family and love them as much as she loved him. But I think when she passed, you know, and I think it was said at the museum to me that Peter reached out his hand and he held Hava's hand as they walked together home, which I think was very sweet because I think that he had been waiting on her for a long time. And I think that when she died, he knew that she was coming home and he was very happy about it to see her, I'm sure. But that's because I'm very spiritual and I believe that when someone dies, you are reunited with your loved ones. I think that's how I feel in my way. So I think Peter, or Petter, as I call him, you know, was very sweet, and I think he said, you know, what took you so long, you know. But they're together now, and I'm glad that they are in some way, shape, or form. And Peter, I feel like, was this rich boy that had not like rich as in money, but like he had like a rich imagination because he wrote this amazing story that was an allegory to Nazism, and it was called I think it was called a prehistory of something. Goodness, I can't remember now. But anyway, A Visit from Prehistory, that's what it was called, and it was about a machine named Kadu, who was basically the Nazis, who took over the world, and how the soldiers are trying to fight this machine and trying to destroy him, and the machine is eventually destroyed, and the world is saved. And I think he thought that, you know, this will end soon. Well, in my closing remarks, there we go. There's a better version of the photo. So anyway, I feel like mankind or humanity really lost out on this boy. I really felt like he could have had a lot to offer us. Excuse me, but instead, we killed him. Why? Because he was Jewish. That's the only reason why we killed him. That's it. It had nothing to do with if he was a bad person or not. He was probably one of the sweetest boys. But he taught Hava so much in that time that they had together in Terezin. He taught her English. He taught her shorthand. He taught her, you know, how do you prepare yourself for liberation. And he was very educational with her. Education was so important to him. So Peter's legacy will always be very special to me. And I will do my best to keep his voice going, as when I'm in that museum with him. Let's get a good... Let's see. Oh, you know what? I'm going to just... Here we go. When I'm in the museum with him and his sister, I know that Peter's voice is extremely loud for me. But that's because I can feel the vibrations of, I don't want to say I can like feel them or hear them, or they're in the room with me. That sounds really weird, and that's not what it is. But I always feel like they're there with me, and they're loud, saying, I'm here, we're alive, help us. So my job as a Holocaust historian and as a Holocaust museum volunteer is to keep his voice going and to educate the public on him and to let people know that he was once alive. So this book really means a lot to me. This was actually one of the first Holocaust diaries I ever bought with my own money. And you can tell it's been through so much because I've had this since high school, but luckily it has survived since high school. And Hava actually published this, I want to say, let me see if it says 2004. Yes, 2004 she published this. It was copyright. And the thing that I love about it is that not only does she publish his diary, she puts in some of his art, which is really beautiful. And this is the famous art piece that Ilan Ramon took to space. And this is what Peter's diary looked like. It's written in Czech. And this is a lot of his work here, his diary here. And I can't read it because, first of all, it's in Czech and it's really close together, and I just cannot read it for the life of me. Anyway, and this is his art, and his art, just like Hava's, is fantastic. And he drew flowers, which I thought was really pretty, watercolor and paper. And this is what he did in the Terezin ghetto when he was there. He just wrote ghetto there in English. And then he did these also in the Terezin ghetto as well. So not only was he creative in the Terezin ghetto, he was also very just working hard. And she also posts some family photos as well. And I'm very appreciative for Hava for this book because it shows what Peter was writing. And so this was Peter Gins's diary from the 24th of February of the year 1942, Tuesday until dash. So the diary ends with an entry on August 8th, 1942, a month before Peter's transport to Theresienstadt, which is Terezin. 24/11/1942. So I guess this is the 24th of February, 1942. In the morning, I was at home. In the afternoon, a car came from the health insurance to take Daddy to the Jewish hospital on Lublanska Street. The car was beautiful, modern, and very springy. It arrived at 3:30 p.m. The Miloses could have been poisoned by a gas leak.
Us, just for one second.
Readjust myself. Should I readjust myself too?
Oh no, you're perfect where you are.
All right.
Action.
And then he says, in the afternoon, I think this is March 4th, 1942. In the afternoon at school, we had a test in music. I didn't know anything, but I was clever enough to copy it. Afterwards, I had an oral exam in natural history, and we took a math test. In the afternoon, I was outdoors with Slavic, which is funny because Slavic also is a name that Otto Wolff used to describe the guy too. Alright, in the afternoon, I was in town and at the dental ambulatory clinic on Kelly Street. Skloy by the old school. This is the original Czech name of the street, changed to Kelly Street under the Nazis regime, of course, because of the abscesses that has been forming on my gums for a long time now. In the afternoon at home. So you see, he doesn't really describe any of his feelings. He describes what he did during the day. But as Hava said, she never saw any entry that he was worried or scared or frightened. You know, when he was writing this diary, his writing was very orderly, as she put it, and very nice and neat. But coming to his own deportation, he began to write very nervously, and he was just unorganized with his writing. So let's see if we can see any of that unorganization. Okay, so at the end she says, towards the end of his diary, Peter's handwriting becomes more nervous. His handwriting is different, disorganized, unsteady. It is clear that he's going through a major psychological crisis. He feels that now it is his own turn. His childhood is ended, his happy life with his parents, his sister, his school is finished. 14-year-old Petter begins 2 years of living in Theresienstadt with new friends and new creative projects. 2 years which ends his journey to a gas chamber in Poland. So this is very important to know that his voice will always be loud to me. It always will be screaming, oh, I'm here, help me. And it's my goal and my job as, like I said, as a Holocaust historian, as a Holocaust historian who studies teens and children, Petter means the world to me, and he always will.
I never saw anything he wrote that he is frightened or worried, because everything in his diary he wrote, it was just recording facts, not feelings. He didn't feel a need to record his feelings, because his feelings he remembered, and the facts he was afraid to forget.
Kanye's being dumb again, praising Hitler. Oh God. Oh, Nazis are rising everywhere. Isn't that fun? Gosh. But then again, this country doesn't have an issue with anti-Semitism. Oh no, it doesn't, right? I think what really bothers me, and it's really sad, is that so many of these people, like I would say like politicians too, and these celebrities, they take, what he says into consideration. They'll blame us in some certain degree of whatever they want to blame us for. Or, oh, we control the media, and all these very anti-Semitic lies that have been taken as facts because they've been told over and over. This is nothing new, folks. It's ridiculous. But for me, this makes my job as a Holocaust Museum volunteer a lot more important. Because, hold on one second, because for me...
An unknown phone number said...
okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Anyway, my job as a Holocaust Museum volunteer is to educate the public. That's what I do. I educate them. So for me, that's the young people. The diaries that I study, the people that I study, they were real. They had feelings. They know what this looks like because they died for it. Unfortunately for them, they did not get the chance to live, a lot of them past their 18th or 20th birthday. There are a few exceptions to some diarists, like my friend Peter Feigl, who was able to survive. But it's really, really tragic that people cannot understand that what they say could hurt the other people.
that Kanye has to spew all this rhetoric that white supremacists just love. It's tragic. People don't understand that that's how the Holocaust started, is with all this rhetoric that Jews controlled everything, Jews controlled the banks, we do everything. But here's the thing about that. We did those things because we were not allowed to get into society, to be in mainstream society. We just weren't. And then we are successful, we're your doctors, we're bankers, we're lawyers, we're a lot of things, because that's what we did to survive. It's very upsetting that people now, but unlike then, we do have a lot of people that are outraged and they condemn and they say never again. But you have to understand what this does to a Holocaust survivor when they hear all this rhetoric being done. It's terrifying to them. I remember talking to Irene Fogel-Weiss, who is a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, and she is terrified, absolutely terrified about what is happening right now in our country. She's trying to make plans to leave and she doesn't know where to go because she doesn't know where she'd be accepted or wanted. We can't have these survivors live in fear of a country that won't condemn this. Study, mostly, are of teens and children. And you're thinking, yes, Kate, that is a very niche part of the Holocaust to study. But for me, that's what speaks to me more than anything, are the voices of the young people. Because who gets affected most by all this are the young people. It's... How do I say this in a way that's not over-exaggerant? But it's like, if you don't learn from history, things can repeat itself. Well, what is happening now is that there's a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric that's coming again. Now, the Holocaust did not at all solve the problem of anti-Semitism. It did not. What it did do, though, was give these white supremacists and these conspiracy theorists, if you will, it gave them something else to mock us for. There'll be people that say, oh, the Holocaust never happened, or there were no gas chambers at Auschwitz, and all these, and we ourselves killed our own people. That's a funny one I've heard. But it's not, the Holocaust is something that we need to learn and study. Because if we're going to try to keep it happening from happening again, if we want to keep it, let me put it this way, if we want to stop it before it gets really bad, then we need to do something. That's why a lot of young people are, speaking out against this, condemning Kanye. But people need to stop interviewing Kanye. Like, I'm serious. People need to stop interviewing him. Because the more they do, the more rhetoric he spews out. Jews only make up, not even a lot of the world's population at all. They're not a lot. I think it's maybe 2.5%. But yet, it's like we are the marginalized group that usually gets attacked first. Because we're an easy target. That's how we've always been, sadly. With the Holocaust, though, it's like a new medium of attack. People will mock the way we were treated when Hitler was in power. But then, of course, people are like, oh, well, we need to forgive Hitler. No. Do you think Felicia's Garda would ever forgive the Germans or Hitler, for that matter? Do you think, Ruth Mayer's family would ever forgive him? No. It's not something we would gladly do. I want you to try to picture your family, your almost entire family, being murdered just because they were Jewish. It is very difficult for people to fathom. It's very difficult for people to comprehend. And it's very difficult for people to understand. It is very, very hard. Because people don't understand that, yes, we of us are gone. That's a lot of people. 6 million families were affected. And, you know, these people are just, you know, these goons, you know, act like it's not a big deal. They'll ban Anne Frank from classrooms. They'll ban any type of Jewish book or Holocaust book for no reason at all. I don't know why. Why are they afraid of her? Stop being afraid of a 15-year-old girl. Oh my God, stop being afraid of her. She is not scary. What she is trying to do is educate you people on what was really going on. Because some of us had really no clue. America in the involvement of the Holocaust. There is a great documentary called The U.S. and the Holocaust made by Ken Burns that just came out. And it's fabulous. Please watch it if you have the chance, wherever you can stream it or find it. It is so good because it explains how America, people would like to say, oh, America was a safe haven for Jews. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. They let some Jews in. They let us in somewhat, but then they had a cap on their immigration policies. So we pretty much were murdered. No other country would help us besides Asia, which the Philippines did not require a visa. So a lot of Jews were able to get to the Philippines. Some Jews were able to get to Canada. Some Jews were able to get to Australia. Some Jews were able to get to what is now Israel, which at the time was, I guess, Palestine, at that time. But it's just so, to me, this whole world, this is not the world I thought I'd grow up in. You know, I know people are going to be racist and prejudiced no matter what, but for all of this now, and also to think that some of these people, I'll say these goons, think that Anne Frank had white privilege. If she had white privilege, she would still be alive. She did not have white privilege because in the eyes of the Nazis, Jews were not considered pure. They were not. Even though Peter Gins, completely white, blonde hair, blue eyes, was not pure because he was not fully Aryan, according to the Nazis. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Keep Anne's name out your mouth, please, because spoiler alert, she doesn't like you. She knows what's going on. Long story short, she knows. It's not like she's just dead and she's forgotten. She knows what's happening. I can imagine that so many of these survivors' families that are still alive, like second gen, third gen, they are terrified and horrified by what is happening. Rabbis are trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out how, for their safety, like how to protect their temples from crazy people trying to shoot up temples, which have happened in the past several years because of these anti-Semitic rhetoric and lies. Just this year, we had that happen. We had a hostage situation at a temple because some goon thought that we knew people in government. We do not. But that's one of the lies that people tell, that we know we're trying to take over the world, we're in power, we know everything. Good Lord, no, we do not. I can assure you. All we want, or at least the Jewish people want, is to be left alone. That's all we want. To be remembered and to educate the public about the Holocaust, and especially for me, about these young people. That's why now I've decided to bring my Holocaust diary collection. That's what I want to do, is bring these books so students, when they come into the museum and into the exhibit that I work in, because the Holocaust diary exhibit is my territory. That's my thing. That's my exhibit. And people at the museum know that. So they put me there exclusively because they know that that's what I study mainly. That is my focus, are the voices of teens and children when it comes to their diaries. Why? Because you must realize that Anne Frank's book was put in my hands when I was 9 years old. My grandfather gave me that gift, The one story I'd like to tell you is the story of my grandfather. No, sadly, he was not a Holocaust survivor, but the way that he talked about the war then, you might, the way that I talk about him, you would think he was one. But he was not one at all. He was not. My grandfather was born here. He was born in Borger. And Borger is kind of a very small town up by the Amarillo area. He lived in Fort Worth for almost half his life. And when the war hit America, or should I say when the war came to America, he wanted to go and enlist. He wanted to go and fight and said he wanted to just kick some Nazi ass. That's what he wanted to do. But he was 13, but his brothers served. And his mother said, I'm losing 2 boys, I'm not losing another one. My grandfather was really a man that studied history as he got older and wanted to know more about what he had just grown up in. Because he grew up in the 30s and 40s. He grew up when the Holocaust was occurring. But he knew that later, he always told me that Anne Frank was going to open doors for me. And he told me that Anne Frank is going to be the reason why I'm going to fight for so many people. What he didn't realize, my grandfather has now since passed, sadly, but what he did not realize is that Anne Frank not only opened those doors for me, but she gave me other diaries to study and other people to fight for, which now, has led me to this wonderful volunteer opportunity that I do every Tuesday. It's amazing when you get to be in that exhibit and you see those faces and those diaries or on display, or the voices that are on display. It gives you a feeling that you have something more to fight for. For me, that's what I intend to do. And God is my witness, I'm going to keep fighting for them until I can't fight for them anymore. But I think with so many diaries that are now coming out, and diaries that are being discovered, and so many different diaries that are just, oh my God, honestly, they're just so special. Every diary that is published, I buy. My last one that I bought was, I want to say it was Yitzhak Yudashevsky's diary, and I found that for a very good price, because diaries like Yitzhak's and Moshe's are out of print now. Anne Frank will never be out of print. You won't have to worry about that. She has a foundation behind her that publishes it every year, which is great. Or every few years, I should say. But anywho, I'm glad that she keeps getting her book published. It's great. But I do wish the same for other people's diaries, because they don't get the same treatment. Moshe's diary has been out of print for over 20 years, but very rarely will you find it on like eBay, or you can find it on Amazon. Amazon, you pay like maybe $100 for it. For me, I got mine as a gift, so I don't know how much someone paid for my copy. But I can tell you, when I was trying to look for it, it was not cheap. Yitzhak's diary is a little bit more out of print as well, but the reason it has not been in print for so long is because there hasn't been a foundation, or I guess a museum, to republish it every year. Mary Berg's diary is going through this right now. Mary Berg's diary, luckily, is going to be republished, and I'm going to be a part of that process, so I'm very excited. Otto Wolff's diary, I'm trying to publish that in English, fully. And part of it was published in Salvage Pages, which is an amazing book, but I want to publish it fully so that people can finally read his diary. Rennie Spiegel's diary was just published not too long ago, thank God. It's been out of the bank vault for a few years. And I'm trying to think. Rutge's diary was just published too. I don't know if that diary will be out of print or so. I'm not entirely sure. Helene Bear's diary, you can find it. It's not hard to find. I think it was published also a few years ago. Ruth Mayer's diary was published in 2009. You can still find it, but it has to be overseas though, because it was published in England. It was not published here in the States. It's just amazing, just the world that we live in now. I can't fathom what's going on now. It's terrifying. It's not the world I wanted to live in, and I'm sure it's not the world that these survivors want to live in either. I can tell you that now. It's not the world that they had hoped. They had hoped that when the Holocaust was over, it was done. But it's getting to the point where people are believing this rhetoric again. I mean, they always have, but it's like they need to know that it's not right. It's not the truth. These rhetorics have been they've been in the works for years, unfortunately. Anti-Semitism has been around for centuries. It's not like it's ever going away. If it is going away, we'd have the right to fight it, but people won't speak out against it. Why? Because, oh, it'll ruin my career. Oh, man. It'll make me look like a bad person. No, if you speak out against hatred, you're doing the greater good for your own self and for the other communities. Oh my God, people. Is interesting. It wasn't until a few days ago when I was volunteering at the museum, as I usually do, when a student came up and asked if there were any diarists part of the LGBTQ community. To my surprise, there is. I have found one. Ruth was born in November of 1920 in Austria, but it wasn't until my honeymoon in Portland this year when she kind of crash-coursed herself into my life. I was at Pal's bookstore just browsing the books as I usually do, and my husband said, "Do you have this?" And now, I had never heard of Ruth Mayer, let alone ever knew that she had a diary. Even though Ruth's story ends in tragedy, it was the research that was really an interesting journey. So Ruth she goes to Norway to finish her studies, basically. And she meets this poet named Gunvor. I'm sorry, I'm butchering her name, God bless. Anyway, she meets her, and Gunvor really falls in love with Ruth, and Ruth falls in love with her, and they live together. And they both work, I guess, for the labor union or something. I'm not entirely sure. It's kind of a little weird, I guess, where they live together and all that. But anyway, Ruth is arrested because she's Jewish, not because she's queer or gay or any of that stuff. But she is arrested, and she is deported to Auschwitz, where she is murdered. Gunvor is in such disarray after all this. She dies, I believe, in a hospital. I think it's a mental hospital where she dies. I'll have to bring up the article again. But anyway, she has a lot of mental health issues,
after Ruth's death. She thinks Ruth is coming back. That's what she thinks. And after she finds out Ruth was murdered, it was all over for her. She never got over Ruth, I don't think. And that's, people like to tell me that, oh, the LGBTQ, it's all new and it's a fad and it's, everybody wants to be gay. No, these people have been around for years, like absolute years, guys. Like Ruth, in her diary, she expresses her love for Gunvor, and she expresses her love for women in general. But then when you read more in her diary, she expresses her love for men as well. So you're like, okay, she could be bi, or she could just identify as queer. But either way, she definitely is part of the LGBTQ community. And it's a good resource for young students or the LGBTQ youth who want someone to look up to. I think Ruth is a perfect example of, she's a perfect example of someone you want to read about if you're trying to feel like you belong in this community. I don't think Ruth ever, quote, came out. I don't think that was a thing. I mean, it was a thing, but I don't think it was a thing for her, because she never expressed I came out. She never said, oh, I come out as this or I came out as that. She never did that. Ever. All she expressed in her diary was how much she loved a certain woman, Gunvor, or some other guy. But she was very interested in, I think, in everything, and she wanted to explore everything, and that's great. Like, good for you. Like, that's awesome. Gunvor, she's the reason why Ruth's diaries are here now. She saved them all. She kept them in her personal belongings, and when Jan Erik Vold was going to prepare a biography on Gunvor, he found the diaries, all of them, in a box. And he's the reason why they are out in the open now. Ruth's sister Judith did survive the Holocaust. She was able to get to England with her mother. But sadly, I don't even know if her sister's alive anymore. God, she was real old. But anyway, Gunvor is a very interesting character as well. She is the type of person I felt like that really had a lot of feeling. And with Ruth, it was like she felt like Ruth was the love of her life. But Ruth was murdered, sadly. Ruth was killed. And it wasn't because she was part of the LGBTQ community. I don't even think they knew, personally, but Gunvor, I think she had another partner, as far as I know, but it just wasn't the same. Ruth was gone, and she could not get over Ruth, and that was very painful for her, that she could not cope with the death of her lover. But more information about that when we arrive. And I can't wait to show you some of the articles that I've found that express what we've just discussed. This article, it says, Ruth Mayer's queerness is overlooked in Holocaust research. This is exactly what I was talking about. Like, oh my God, I'm researching this woman, you're reading her diary, and all of a sudden, it's like she's talking about loving a woman, she's talking about loving Gunvor, and then she's talking about loving a man. So, she is queer. She's here, she's queer. Awesome. So, it says here, so this is Gunvor here, and this is Ruth. And it says, the love between Gunvor Hofmo and Ruth Mayer is no secret in the research community and the general public, but the sexual descriptions in Mayer's diary have often been overlooked and downplayed. Okay, so
I think there are a number of central questions in her text about being a woman and queer that have not been explored enough in the past, which is why which I'm keen to highlight. Says this. She's a doctoral candidate. So Ingeborg Helleberg is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Linguistics and Nordic Studies at University of Oslo, and she basically is writing this article. And so she wrote her diary from the age of 12 all the way up to 22. She was born in Austria, which I knew, but she is a refugee, and she went to Norway. And she lived in Norway from 1939 until the 26th of November 1942, when she was deported to Auschwitz on the cargo ship Danu and then killed upon arrival. Which, in her diary, it just said that she was arrested, basically, and she was taken and deported, but it doesn't say that she was on a cargo ship, which I can imagine because she's in Norway and they have to get all the way to Poland. So it says, in her diaries, Ruth Mayer wrote everything from banal everyday things such as schoolwork and leisure activities to philosophical aspects of her own sexuality and life as a Jew during German occupation. Yes. She says that today Ruth Mayer has a central place in the Norwegian memory culture and is sometimes referred to as our Anne Frank, which I understand, but the thing about when you're trying to compare Anne Frank to other diarists, they at least need to have something in common with her, not just the diary aspect. Anne was not queer at all, I can tell you that now. But until recently, almost no one in Norway had heard of her. Well, that doesn't surprise me, because when I looked at Ruth's diary, I had never heard of Ruth Mayer at all, period. Like, she just kind of popped out of oblivion and was like, here, I'm queer. Awesome. So, expands the Holocaust debate, the story, okay, but also a queer tale. Alrighty, so as Helleberg points out, it was not only the Jews who were victimized in Nazi, but they were minority groups, yes, I know, as homosexuals, yes. I think a topic we can talk more on. Ruth Mayer has been an important voice in this narrative. She's one of the few who has written about being a woman and queer during the Second World War, which is very true because, like I said, when I study diaries and I read about the people, it is very rare for these diarists to put in how they feel about, say, well, let's take Ilya Gerber for an example. Ilya Gerber wrote, he was in the Kovno ghetto in Lithuania, and he writes that he loves this girl. I think her name is Hannah, I don't remember. But anyway, he loves her so much, and he talks about her a lot. Anne Frank and Renée Spiegel talk about their loves and their crushes. And they're both males, so you can tell that they are heterosexual. But when it comes to Ruth, when you're reading her diary, the first thing she states when it comes to school and their classmates, she's in love with a woman. And you're thinking, okay, she's a lesbian. Awesome. Good for you, girl. But then, as it turns out, she loves a man too. So she states that later in her diary. And it makes you go, okay, is she bi? Is she just queer? What is she? So you're reading this diary and you're just trying to figure out what she is. But when she comes to Gunvor, she really discusses how she feels wonderful with Gunvor and how she loves Gunvor. So in this article, it says the twin souls of Ruth Mayer and Gunvor Hofmo. I know I'm butchering her name. So in the fall of 1940, Ruth Mayer, oh, how nice. Okay, that's great. Bloop. Okay, in the fall of 1940, Ruth Mayer met Gunvor, later to become a well-known Norwegian poet, where both women volunteered with the Women's Labor Service in occupied Norway. Despite the difficult external circumstances, there was a shortage of food in Norway because of the war, and the farm work that the women had to do was very strenuous. Mayer and Hofmo enjoyed a comparatively carefree and happy time together, which is great. The one twin died. Okay, but even during this period, Mayer found herself overcome by a sense of loneliness and being misunderstood, feelings which became particularly strong once the German Wehrmacht occupied Norway. They eventually led to a nervous breakdown, and in early 1941, Mayer had found herself committed to a psychiatric ward. Gunvor's visits
were the only ray of hope during the 7 weeks she spent there. Okay, in fact, it seems that Hofmo was the only person in Norway who really cared about Mayer. Hofmo later referred to Mayer as her twin soul, and the one twin died. Norwegian police officers entered the Engelmann boarding house for girls and the young women in Oslo on November 26, 1942, and took Ruth Mayer away. The arrest is said to have been violent. Mayer was dragged into a car, forced to board the Danu, a prisoner transport ship, on the very same day. 5 days later, she was murdered at Auschwitz, along with 187 Jewish women, 42 children, and 116 men from Norway who were unable to work. Let's see if we can bring up a good picture of her. There we go. Gunvor, at this point, when Ruth is taken away, it's like she lost a piece of her. She lost a whole piece of her. So as it says here, Gunvor never got over the loss of her girlfriend. This traumatic experience was probably one of the reasons for the crisis Hofmo went through in the 1950s, which caused her to become a long-term patient at the Gostad Mental Hospital in Oslo for 2 decades. In the intimate post-war period, Hofmo had suffered from obsessions which became increasingly intrusive. She heard voices and was afraid of radiation in her head. On a vacation through France, she thought she saw Ruth Mayer again on a number of occasions, but the women she approached denied that she was Ruth. Oh man. Central parts of the lyrical work that Gunvor produced from 1946 onward with her love of her friend who had been cruelly snatched away from her. Hofmo had been referred to as the singer of darkness because of her poems. Okay. So, let's see here. This is Gunvor here. This is Gunvor and Ruth. This is Gunvor as well. Oops. Let's see. Oh, well, that's my Twitter. Haha, that's funny. My thing came up on my Twitter. That's so funny. Let's see if I can, there we go. I love this picture of Gunvor, but Gunvor, I think, is one of those people that really loved Ruth. And when you understand their relationship, it's like, wow, they really loved each other. And people like to tell me, oh, the LGBTQ, you know, they weren't existing then. No. What do you call their relationship? Well, anyway, their relationship is beautiful, and Gunvor just never got over her, really. It's sad. Like, it's depressing. It is depressing. Anxiety about queer topics. So it says, also in this article that I found, Ruth Mayer's love affair with Gunvor is no secret to in the research community and the general public. Nevertheless, Helberg believes that the sexual descriptions in the diary have been overlooked or downplayed. Okay. For example, people have preferred to call them girlfriends and soulmates rather than boyfriends. She refers to a quote taken from retelling of the diary from 2020. Finally, I was brave enough to show her my love. Just the two of us were on the bed, legs outstretched. Okay. I scratched at her suspenders with my fingernails bare very lightly. Instead of this dwelling on the intimate description of Mayer's love affairs, they have mostly been concerned with her status as a Jewish refugee. Of course. So they basically, what this article is saying, that they don't want to bring up the fact that she was queer or gay. They just want to say, oh, she was Jewish and that was it. Nobody will ever talk about it, it seems, because they're afraid that it'll, stir something up. A queer pioneer. I do think it is very interesting that when students come up to me, especially when I'm teaching at the Holocaust Museum or educating them in the diary exhibit, because that's my territory. That's where I am every Tuesday. And I have Ruth's diary right there on display. Some kids will ask me, are there any diarists that were part of the LGBTQ community? And I give them Ruth, because that's the only one that I know of so far. Only one. So it says in her diary, she writes openly about her crushes on both men and women. Now, this is what she does, because when I was reading it, I was lost, because I was like, I thought you just said you just loved women. But this is where I lead to believe that she was bi, because she loved men and women. She talks about it in her diary. It's plain as day, right there, guys. Like, really plain. If you ever read it, please do. Find it. It's available. Please find it. It's good. I'm not done yet. On the other hand, the contemporary view of homosexuality defines Ruth Mayer's room for action and how she views her own identity. At the same time, she challenges and opposes such norm, explains Helleberg. With extraordinary freshman, Ruth Mayer explores various forms of masculinity, femininity, and sexuality. Her willingness to express herself about forbidden topics and her ability to relate to other people in that way is transcendent and precious at the time. In time, mean that Hellenberg is considered a pioneer. I would agree. She discusses topics very openly and problematizes the concepts. For example, that the feelings she has towards Gumvo are not unnatural but good, which goes against the heteronormative ideals of the time. In a world, there is a beautiful love story that enriches her life. In several places in her diary, Ruth Mayer uses the term homosexual for people who fall in love with the people of the same sex, but she does not use this word about herself. Interesting. In several places of the diary, same-sex, homosexuality has a stigmatism and limiting meaning that Mayer does not recognize. She loves both women and men and experiences her love as natural and enriching. So you could say that Ruth Mayer is queer or bi. She could very well be part of that community. And so it says the fact that Ruth Mayer fell in love with both men and women means that Helleberg had chosen to do a queer reading of the text. The term queer encompasses more than a category such as lesbian and homosexuals, she explains. Okay. Mayer does not write much about love relationships directly, but more about a number of courtships. Okay, she believes that people in research community are simply used how to interpret the relationship between Mayer and Hoffmo in the text. Okay, so let's see if this picture is big. There it is. This is one of the very few photos that you'll see. I think this is in the diary itself as well. This is Gunvor and this is Ruth. And I think for them, it's just this amazing love story that if you really dive deep into it, it's tragic, really, because Ruth is gone and Gunvor is trying to cope, but she doesn't know how to cope. It's sad, but it's amazing the fact that we have someone such as Ruth who is part of an LGBTQ community, that we hope to God that we could get Ruth's book into classrooms or in these youth's hands so that they can read it and go, oh, there was somebody like me during the Holocaust. Because, most people when they think of the Holocaust, they just think of Jews and that's it. Well, there were a lot of other groups that were affected by this, such as the LGBTQ community, the Jehovah's Witness, and the Romas, and all the other non-Aryan people, if you will. But Ruth, she kind of is a double-edged sword. She's a Jewish refugee, and she's queer. I don't think when they arrested her, I don't think they knew that she was queer. If they did, I'm sure she would have had I think she would have been killed earlier. But luckily for Gunvor, she keeps those diaries, and we now have them because of Gunvor. And it's great that she kept them, but I think the reason why she kept them is because that was the only thing left she had of Ruth. And if she held on to them, then she could still hold on to Ruth too.
I had the honor to be your granddaughter. I could only hope to be half of the whole that you both were. Can only hold you in a picture frame. You held nothing back, gave everything. You loved me that way. You loved me that way.
Ring the bell. You gotta ring the bell, Mom.
What bell is it?
On the left side. And here's
Tell him you're sorry. She gave him a shove out of that thing.
Hey, you okay? Okay.
Caitlin, tell him you're sorry.
What do you say? Tell him
you want like a car looking a little energy on here.
No, Granny's got to take him pull into this wagon.
Oh yeah, I think so too. Uncle Wright's where Uncle Robert's going.
Oh, I am? I didn't know I was.
She gonna wish there was a motor on that dude.
I have really big special interests, and sometimes I get really emotional of the people I study. People like to ask me, Kate, why do you study the diaries of the Jewish teens and children from the Holocaust so much? Well, when I was 9 years old, my grandfather, the one that I remember, my dad's dad, I don't remember my mom's dad very much. I was 6 when he died, so my dad's dad it is. He gave me the diary of Anne Frank, this exact copy, and he handed it to me when I was 9 years old, and he said that this woman is going to open a lot of doors to you, or a lot of doors for you. And being 9 years old, I did not know what he meant by that. But as time went on, and I'm a lot older now, I felt like he knew what he was talking about. That he knew I wanted to have a passion to fight for these people, to share their stories, especially in a time now where their stories are at risk of being erased from our classrooms and our bookshelves and our libraries. These Jewish teens and kids, they speak louder to me than the adults do. They are screaming from the void that they are there, and they want to be heard, and they want to be seen. And Anne is leading the way. She's leading the way to show you, or to show people, not to be afraid of history, not to shy away from it, not to ignore it. Even though the Holocaust happened almost 80 years ago, it doesn't seem that far away or seem so far long ago. Anne's death sparked kind of a domino effect for me, if you will. She led me to another diarist, who led me to another diarist, who led me to another diarist, who led me to a Holocaust survivor who had a diary, who led me to a book about diaries, and then that book had many other diarists in there that I began to study, all because of this woman here. And I just want to tell those people who want to ban her, who want to erase her from history, who want to erase her from classrooms, who want to erase her from our libraries, stop being afraid of this 15-year-old, because she has the power to change the world as she has already. A lot of people ask me, you know, why does she get all the glory and nobody else does? Well, her father established foundations, so she's got a great PR team that she's never even met. She's got a great social media manager she's never met. She's got a great publicist she's never met. And she's got great lawyers who, again, she's never met. But her father made sure that his daughter would have a lasting legacy for years to come. And he didn't know of that impact that he would show. And it changed the world forever. And yet lawmakers are so afraid of this 15-year-old girl. And they've been afraid of her for a long time. Oh no, but it talks about her feelings, and it talks about body stuff, it talks about sex, it talks about teenage things. Well, when she was 13, that's when she began this diary. What else do you think she would talk about? I implore you to pick up the diary and actually read it, and then you can see how her feelings change within the course of 3 years. The diary has been republished in more than 70 languages and different editions, like I have. This is the British or 60th anniversary edition. Each edition sometimes comes with different like pictures or different special features to it. But this is one that I really love because it's kind of the same version of this picture. And then recently, this was the 2020 version. There's a 2021 version now, but I don't know where it is because I can't seem to find it. But this is the 2020 version. And this version is really special to me. This is the Anne Frank House edition. So you can only buy this edition if you go to the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. And it's very special. My dad brought it back for me when he was in Holland. And if I can pull it out, it is shaped or designed like Anne's diary. And if you open it, there is her handwriting and pictures of her and Margot, or Margot. I would say Margot. And then inside is the beautiful picture of Anne. And Anne is extremely important if you were studying Holocaust diaries, because she usually is the first one that people begin to study. And she is the person that people like to discuss in schools, classrooms, well, schools and classrooms, I guess you could say, museums, offices, and libraries. So the thing that we can do now is try to protect her and the 1.5 other million Jewish teens and children from being erased, which they never will be. But we want to help their stories still be here. A lot of them have been gone for almost 85, 86, or just 80 years in general. Anne's been dead almost 81. Could be wrong. She's been dead for 80-something years. But anyway, now is a critical time where these stories are at risk, where these stories need to be told, and diaries are documents now. Anne's diary is a document. It is a diary that is so iconic that it's not even on for public view at the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. Why? Because you know people are going to be dumb and want to destroy it or steal it or do anything to it. So yes, it is hidden with lock and key, you know, and it's being kept very well preserved. But now is a time where we must preserve those other stories as well. We must preserve Otto's diary, Mary Berg's, Kate, my brother and I, on history, the classics, movies, anything. But I think what my grandfather did for me is when I was 9, when he handed me the diary of Anne Frank, he wanted me to realize that one of these days, or he knew at some point, I would want to fight for her, or the time would come to fight for her, and countless others. And I think for him, teaching me or educating me about the Holocaust was really a gift for me. I found what I loved studying other than films and making films and editing and the 1930s and 40s films that I loved. But I think what he gave me was a concrete event. Or should I say, as he told me, the Holocaust is not just an event. It was not just an event. It was a personal event. It affected 6 million families. Every person had a name, had a story, and they died for no reason other than the fact that they were Jewish and somebody with this crazy idea that Jews needed to be erased. And he said that they almost succeeded, but we stepped in and the world stepped in. And they said, no more. I think when I was 13 years old, the same age Anne was when she wrote her diary, we were living in Ashburn, Virginia. And he came up for a visit, and he took me to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. for the first time. And it was an experience that I will never forget. He held onto my hand, and we walked in together, and he said, I want you to remember everything you saw here, because everything you see in this museum is what happened. It may not be pretty, but it's what happened. It's real. And there's going to be people down the line that are going to tell you that it never happened. We went to, I think we went to some flea market or something, and there were people outside, I guess, protesting and what have you. I don't really remember. But he looked at me and he said, those people are dangerous. And that was the first time I encountered white supremacy.
If I could make the world a small town, maybe we'd pray a little more, thank the Lord, learn to slow it all down. Maybe all of us would love big enough to turn it all around. If I could make the world a small town, a small town. There's a sweetness in the water, everybody knows your name. Biscuits on the table, everybody has a place. Corn and cows, kids and kindness, growing up everywhere. Some things you just can't teach, you just know from being there. If I could make the world a small town, maybe we'd pray a little more, thank the Lord, learn to slow it all down. Maybe all of us would love big enough to turn it all around. If I could make the world a small town. No, 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 don't let me go. Yeah. No, 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 don't let me go. Open up the sky. Let it go and I'll take Really want me, you should prove it to me. If you really want me, you should prove it to me. If you really want me, you should prove it to me. If you really want me, you should prove it to me. If you really want me.
If you know me personally, you know that I have spoken about this young man quite a few times. If you were at the Holocaust Museum on Tuesdays, and if you see me in the diary exhibit, which I usually am there, then you will definitely have heard me speak about this young man for, oh goodness, hours. Who is this young man and why is he so important to me? This is Otto Wolff. And Otto Wolff was a Czech teenager who was murdered during the Holocaust. And he left behind something very valuable that I have studied for quite some time. He left behind a few volumes of diaries, and his diaries are very, very important to study as well as to understand why he wrote them or just how they were saved in general. We're going to go through a few of his siblings as well as get to their story. Otto is the youngest of 3 children. His older brother Kurt, which we are going to discuss, is a very important story as well as his sister Felicitas. And Felicitas, you will see, plays a very, very big part in this story. So let's begin and we'll go through the Wolff siblings. There we go. We begin our story with Kurt, the oldest. Kurt was born on February 13, 1915 in Lipnik, Czech Republic. And as you can see, a very handsome and dapper young man he is. Kurt studied medicine, and Kurt went to the most exclusive medical school in all the Czech Republic. He went to Masaryk University in Brno. And unfortunately, when the Nazis came to town, he only had one more exam before he got his doctorate, or should I say his master's degree, or his doctorate. And he only had to take one more test, and then the Nazis kicked him out. So sadly, he never got the chance to become a doctor like he wanted. He joined a military unit in Kharkiv, Ukraine, to help the Russians fight the Germans, and he fought in a Czechoslovak unit in Ukraine. And ultimately, he fought in the Battle of Sokolovo, which happened in March of 1943. Unfortunately, he was very badly wounded, but this is where people tend to not know how he actually perished. People like to think that he just was killed in battle and that was it, but according to an article that was written in 2021, he actually put a gun on himself after he was very badly wounded. And the reason why he did this, he said, I don't want to die by the Nazis in any way. So he killed himself. Basically, he was already dying, and he knew as a doctor he had to make that hard call. He died on March the 9th, 1943. His body was never recovered, unfortunately, so it's still in Kharkiv, Ukraine today, and I'm sure it is now bones and dust due to the war going on in Ukraine. But Kurt, funny enough, the medical school that he went to still has records of him. They remember him going there, and they still have a lot of the records of him. And I was able to reach out to that school, and they were very, very lovely. And they were able to give me a lot of information on Kurt. And Kurt was only 28 years old when he died, sadly, and he would have been over 100 if he survived today. Next, we're going to talk about the middle child. Her name is Felicitas, or Litsi or Lika, as she was known as. Felicitas was born on March 27th, 1920, also in Lipnik, Czech Republic, and she was a Olomouc renowned seamstress, clothes maker, clothes designer, you name it, anything with fashion, she did. fashionista, fashion icon. We love to see it. Anyway, Felicitas was the middle child, and she doted on her siblings with such love and care. She worked in a clothing store for many years, up until the Nazis told her she couldn't work there anymore. Then she went to work as a farmhand to try to help her parents gain money. In 1942, she and her family went into hiding, her brother Otto and her parents. They hid with a man who she was dating, I guess, at the time. His name was Yaroslav Zdrel, also known as Slavic in Otto's diary. And he was helping them, protecting them, mainly because he loved her very much. But it was very, very difficult trying to live underneath his conditions because A, sometimes he wouldn't show up, and B, her feelings would change, and so would his. And so in April of 1943, or 4, I believe it was 44, I'll have to double check. They went to live with their former housekeeper, Marinka Zabrol. And the Zabrals had a very nice little house, and they were able to stay in the attic of that house. Felicitas helped with cooking, cleaning, sewing, you name it. She made herself useful. In 1945, they had to go to the O'Hara's house because František Zabrol could not handle them anymore. He said, the risk is too great, I don't want to be shot. So they moved to the O'Hara's house, and that's when hell begins to break loose. In April of 1945, the Vlasvolite troops show up to the O'Hara's house, or show up to the house where they are staying at the O'Hara's, and they demanded for identification. Now, these Vlasvolite troops were not looking for Jews initially. They were looking for partisans, and partisans were people that hid in the forest or the little towns, and they attacked Nazis at every opportunity. Sounds like a pretty badass job, but it was really dangerous. And unfortunately, Otto got caught in the crossfire, which we'll get into very shortly. After Otto's arrest, I would say, or roundup, Felicia took the liberty of writing in her brother's diary, giving us details about what had happened to him in ways that saying Otto was rounded up and that they had to flee back into the forest. Unfortunately, she never saw her brothers again. It was the last time she ever saw him. And on May 8th, 1945, they were liberated by the Russian troops. And she found out about both her brothers Kurt and Otto's deaths on the same day. And after the war, she married a man named Otto Gratzer, and she has 2 daughters, Hannah, H-A-N-A, and Ava. And in 1968, she decided to make the risky trip of coming to the United States and trying to gain citizenship here, which she did in November of 1968. She became an American citizen. It's then said that she worked in a lot of clothing stores here in America, but I'm not entirely sure what she did, and that's kind of the most difficult part about the research about her, is that I don't know what she did after the war. I'm not sure where she was. I know she lived in Florida, I know she lived in Wisconsin, I know she lived in Illinois, and I know she's buried in Wisconsin next to her husband. Felicitas kept the diaries for many, many years. And in 1995, at age 75, she donated those diaries to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., which they are still there today. She donated this picture of her, she donated a picture of Kurt, and she donated the only photo that is ever known of Otto. Are there any more pictures of Otto? We'll never know, because there's only been one. Felicitas died on June 7th, 2006, a few days what would have been Otto's 75th birthday. Sadly, Felicitas did not do very many interviews. She did not do any type of survivor type thing. She kept the memories of Otto and Kurt very, very private, sadly. The missed opportunity I feel like Felicitas had was discussing her brothers, because I felt like they could have had more of a voice in a way. But I understand that sometimes with deaths, especially the way that Otto was killed and the way that Kurt was killed, it was very, very tragic for her and very traumatizing. And I'm sure she did not want to relive those memories. But she did give us the gift of Otto's diaries, initially in the book Salvage Pages, which Alexander Zapruder was very lucky enough to get an interview with Felicitas, as well as get permission to publish excerpts of his diary. In 1997, the Czech Republic published his diary for the first time in Czech. And you can actually read Otto's full diary. It's in Czech, but you can translate it. It's online. But Felicitas, I feel like she's so mysterious in so many ways. It's like there's so many questions about her, and yet I don't know if I'll ever know those answers. I hope to at some point in the near future, but she means a lot to me, and I want to definitely keep her story alive, especially. I know she's been gone for almost 20 years, and I want to make sure that what she did for us, especially giving us Otto Wolff's diaries, were not in vain. So, Otto's life began on June 5th, 1927 in Molenice, Moravia, Czech Republic. They grew up in the Olomouc region of the Czech Republic for many, many years. Otto went to school and was a very wonderful student. He made good grades, as well as he made many friends. From what I've been able to find about Otto and his personality is that he was very sweet and gentle. He treated women with respect, and he treated his elders with respect, but he was also a very curious boy. He loved to write poems, as well as he loved to write news stories or just try to get involved in organizations. I don't know if you would call him a Zionist, but he definitely was a very active person in his community. So, in 1942, Otto began a diary. He was 15 years old, and he began his diary by saying that they were being moved out and they were on their way to be deported to Theresienstadt. Had his family did comply with being deported to Theresienstadt, they would never have been heard from again. But however, according to Felicitas, they decided to decline that invitation, and they went into hiding. Now, they went into hiding with Slavic, and they went into hiding with Marie Zabrol, and they went into hiding with the O'Haras. On April 17th or 18th, 1945, the Velasquez troops came to the house where they were staying at or hiding at, and they looked at Otto, and they realized Otto was 17 at this time, and he looked like a fighting age. He looked like he could be a partisan. They asked the family for identification, and ultimately, Felicitas couldn't find his identification. So, Otto tried to save himself by saying he was visiting the O'Haras, and he is from Telek, and of course the troops do not believe him, and they say, "You're coming with us." And they round up 23 young men from the Zakhrov area, and they take them downtown or to the headquarters, and they are questioned, basically tortured for information that they had nothing to do with being a partisan or anything. Otto is denounced as a Jew when he arrives by a man named Hudlink, who is a local fascist who happened to know Otto very well. And ultimately, he is tortured by the Gestapo for information of who he is and where his family is. He gives nothing. Absolutely nothing. He says, "I'm not telling you a damn thing." And I think that's really what's brave about him, because he loved his family that much that he'd be willing to die for them. And that's exactly what he did. On April 20th, 1945, he and 23 other young men were shot to death and then burned. He was only 17 years old. He would have been 18 had he survived. However, his diaries were saved by his sister, miraculously. And the story of Otto was lost for many, many years until the 1980s, when Otto's story became public news again. But it wasn't until the 90s when Otto's story really became big in the Czech Republic. In 1995, Felicitas donated Otto Wolff's diaries to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Great. And they're still there. You can actually look at them. If you go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website, type in Otto Wolff, and you'll see the Otto Wolff and Felicitas Gardas papers. Check them out. They're absolutely stunning. And they look great. And they've been kept in such good condition for over 80 years. In 2002, Alexander wrote a wonderful book called Salvage Pages, in which she interviewed Felicitas and she mentions Otto.
Picture perfect, you are worth it, you deserve it, make it worth it. Picture perfect, you are worth it, you deserve it, oh yeah, make it worth it. Picture perfect, I can't stop thinking about you and me and how we used to be better. Picture perfect, I can't stop thinking about you and me. Wish it could have been better.
I see things very differently. It's nobody's fault, but I just see things differently. As an autistic person, I get a lot of questions, especially about my interest about this. The first thing they usually ask is, Kate, why do you want to be interested in the Jewish teens and children from the Holocaust? Second question I usually get, why the diaries? Why are you so obsessed with certain ones? Why do you have to talk about them, write about them, learn about them all the time? They've been dead for so long. I laugh sometimes at these questions because some people just don't understand the way the special interests work. To me, this is my field. This is what I've been wanting to study for years, since I was 13 years old. Well, I would say since I was 9, but I didn't start taking my Holocaust studies seriously until I reached middle school. My grandfather always inspired me to fight for the people who aren't here anymore, to remember the people who aren't here anymore. But to answer these questions, if you would have asked me this maybe 15 to 20 years ago, I would have told you I don't know. But I think now, as I'm getting older and I'm understanding myself, I'm starting to realize why these people are so important to me. And to be honest with you, I feel like I'm remembering them. I'm giving them a legacy to have. Yes, a lot of these teens and children were dead before they were 20, but that doesn't mean they have to be forgotten either. To me, I feel like these Jewish teens and children are so important. The diaries are more important to me because I'm a diarist myself. I keep diaries, I write them. But in all honesty, I think for me is all about remembrance. They say never again, and I will make sure never again.
diary came to me in June, I want to say, or July of last year. And I think for me, these diarists find me in some way. My husband was talking about her, and he said, "Have you read her diary yet?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of her." And this diary, I believe, had just come out. Yes, 2019. And it's very, very exciting. And I have had the pleasure and honor of speaking to her family, her sister, Elizabeth, and her niece, Alexandra. And they are very, very lovely people. But I think what's much more important about Rinia is that how much, when she writes, she really hits you in the feels. At least for me, she does. She hits me right in the feelings, and she reminds me so much of Anne Frank in a lot of ways. Not just the fact that she had a diary, but just the fact that she writes kind of in the same style. She writes about her love for Zygmunt. She writes about her poetry. She writes about her feelings. And I think that Rinia is very, very important, even now. Even the fact she did die like Otto Wolff, she was shot. And we won't know where she is now. But wherever she is, I hope that she will find peace. And I know to me, she'll always be with me. I bring her to the museum every Tuesday, and there's a lot of people that ask about her, and she just is very important to me. But I think the other one that really breaks my heart is Rinia. Because Rinia didn't get the chance to be a mom, to hold a baby of her own. She didn't even get the chance to grow up. All we have left is this. And that's good that we have this, but it was hidden away for so long. Been gone for quite some time, and it really sucks. But if you could tell me anything that you remember about her, what was she like? Any great memories you have of Rinia would be appreciated.
Well, she was my surrogate mother, Reina. She was much older than I. I didn't have a mother and I didn't have a father. I just had two older grandparents. So the difference between me and grandparents was big. I was only about 8, 9 years old. And my sister was already, I think, in the gymnasium. And she got, I don't know how she was writing this diary. Maybe it was under her bed. Maybe it was under her pillow. But when I said, Elena, what are you writing? She would always say, I have so much homework to do. So I said, my God, you do it so early in the morning and late at night. She said, yeah, I have a lot of homework to do. And she obviously was writing the diary. Now, we were together at that time from 1939 to 1941. Because, the Soviets came in. Well, she was a well-developed girl. She was not very big, but she had, nice, bosom. And,
She was mature for her
she was
age.
mature for her age.
Physically, psychologically.
Yeah.
You can definitely see that in her diary for sure. She had so many great, for me, it's like when I'm reading it, because I'm going through it, and when I read these diaries, I see how, they could compare to others. And for me, it gives me the Anne Frank vibe because of what she talks about. But I think Rinia talks more about what's going on around her.
Rinia was much older than Anne Frank.
Right. You have to remember the age.
Younger. I think she was 14, wasn't she?
Yes.
My sister goes to 18.
Right.
She has a real boyfriend. I think Frank had that boy, but I don't think it was a real boyfriend.
No, I think Renia really had the real deal, I would say.
He had the real deal. She adored this guy who used to come to the house, sit with her by the stove. Now, the stove was made of ceramics, like they used to make those huge stoves.
Yeah.
It was red in color, kind of red. Yeah. And she would sit in the corner, he'd sit with her, And I didn't see, she writes that she went with him to Zamek or whatever. That was a remote part of the city of Przemyśl. And they used to walk there and talk forever and so on. I think he realized that she was really a brilliant girl.
Yeah.
And she was a president of a literary club.
Wow.
And she used to write whenever they needed something for the school. They asked her she write poetry, whatever they needed. She was actually in a Russian paper with a man in the book called Maciek, who is now Marcel, who was the doctor here in New York for 50 years at Langbo. But he died at 97. He adored my sister too. But she only had the eyes for Zygmunt. He has beautiful, dark, curly hair. He had beautiful green eyes. And he was very fit and very cute. And he had these dimples. And he was very cute boy. And my sister, when we lived in the estate of my father, before we lived in Przemyśl, she loved the life we had because we had beautiful trees, we had beautiful flowers around the house. We used to go pick the small strawberries in the forest. One day I fell and all my strawberries went out. They're called fraises de bois. They don't sell them in America. They sell them in France. It's called fraise de bois. And they're little strawberry like. When you go to the forest where they grow, it smells great. So my sister loved the smell. Then we had a tree called acacia. And that tree, when you pick it, you can chew it a little, and it's sweet. Has like little flowers. My sister liked the flowers. She liked the flowers. She liked the wind blowing. She liked the sunset. She liked everything beautiful in the nature. And she was very smart. She kept starting writing poetry when she was young. And I had to recite it, some of it, in Lviv, which is now called, but it used to be called Lviv. So my mother then realized that I had ability to recite poetry. That's how she took me to Warsaw, where I became the Polish Shirley Temple. But my sister took care of me. She worried what I wear. She worried where I go. She took me with her to the park.
Forever outside town.
I'm begging you. The ground of Auschwitz is bloody, and I have to remind you not to let anybody build or destroy it. It's a cemetery for the whole world, for our children. Everybody have to go and visit. And the ones who say it's not true, we'll be glad to take them in a cattle train, bring them there and live in there.
As a diarist myself, you must realize that I own quite a bit of journals. If you'd like to come, I'll show you what I've got. So, I am a collector, I guess you could say, of diaries, journals, notebooks, that sort of thing. My husband says, I don't want to see you buying any more journals, you have too many. So when I write my diaries, I think I really started taking diary writing seriously in 2019, because I started in February. I started writing kind of movie essays, I guess you could say, about my favorites, and then I started writing down my days, and then I tried to write in every day, and then there was a lot of addresses and stuff like that, days to day, keeping up with my weight, and we went into the pandemic, so I wrote about all that. And then at the end of the first diary was about me. I hope 2022 brings a good joy and love of fun, so I ended in 2021. The second volume of my diary, which began in December of 2021 and on to 2022, really was about beginning it with the Otto Wolff information, and then getting married, because I got married in 2022, so it was all about getting people coming to the wedding, some Holocaust survivor interviews, addresses of my friends, addresses of people, and then my honeymoon, and then my friends' weddings. Cassidy and Victoria both got married last year. And I said bridesmaids party, success, I have the best bridesmaids, and then talked about our plane trip, and here are some things from our honeymoon from Portland. And then a lot of the cards that I received, a lot of the fun stuff that I got for Hanukkah and Christmas. And then my husband, obviously. And then at the end, I basically say I close this diary with a more hopeful year to do better, make better friends, and be a good wife. So I think possibly at the end of this year, this volume was a lot of heartbreak and things with friends and realizing who my actual friends were. And in this diary, the third volume is what I'm working on now, and it shows a lot of my feelings, a lot of my personal struggles with health issues and things like that. And it just describes in my diary how much, I'm trying to get, better friends, trying to be a good wife, love a lot and all that. Okay, so we have those. And I use these specific diaries for these journals, for these type of journals. And they're called Leuchtturm 1917. And I have a bunch right here. I have a few of the same color because they're very few far in between. But anyway, these are going to be served as diaries for the next volumes of my life. I bought quite a few because I'm starting to chronicle my life for my children. I want them to know about their mother. I don't want to hold anything back from their mother, about their mother. So I have a blue one, which will probably be the next volume. I have a red one, and I have 2 green ones, didn't realize, and I have a black one. Then I have some diary journals from Studio Ghibli's films, like Totoro, and they have like little cute things like that. Then I have Kiki's Delivery Service, Princess Mononoke, and Spirited Away. And then I also have this journal from Totoro, which is really fuzzy and cute. I got it at Powell's bookstore, and it's a really cute diary journal. And then this journal I bought at Powell's bookstore in Portland. And I don't really like buying journals that are not lined, but I really loved the way this journal was, so I bought it. And then I bought this journal also at Powell's bookstore, and it's just a normal journal, and it's really, really pretty. So for me, writing is kind of therapeutic in a way. I like to write down things. I also take notes for work as well, because I work at a museum and I am trained on a lot of different things, and so I got to make sure I know everything. But a lot of these journals are ways that I can kind of reflect on my life later, or I can reflect on with people I know or people I love and discuss why I felt that way. And why writing is so important is because you can write down anything, and paper doesn't judge. It's not going to yell at you. It's not going to say that you can't write this, or it's not going to say that you can't. But the world for me is written in ink. It's not written in pencil. I don't like writing in pencil because it fades over time. I use fountain pens to write my diaries all the time because I'm that kind of a professional person. And usually with these diaries, I usually have a certain picture on the front and back. And usually they're like the theme, I guess, or the thing that I was going, that really interests me at the beginning. And so a lot of these things I have, special mementos that I also keep. They're like scrapbooks of my life in a way, because if I don't write it down, I'm going to forget. And one of my worst fears is forgetting about what I did or who I talked to or any special event. So today, I'm going to mark down what I did in the diary. So this came from the Anne Frank house, and my cousin-in-laws bought this for me, basically for the wedding. And it has Anne's diary and talks about Anne Frank and everything. And you can write in here. And I love that. I think I have 2 of these because I believe my father got me one of these as well. I also got one of these from the Anne Frank Center in New York. I'm sorry. So I believe I have a couple of these somewhere, but one of them I got from the Anne Frank house, Anne Frank Center in New York. Which I always feel like these kids or these teens, their spirits work with me. And when I'm at that museum, they're right there too. and I get to talk about them, and it is a pleasure and it is a privilege. It is not a right, it is a privilege that I get to discuss them and I get to share them with the public, with students, with educators, or with anybody who is willing to listen. As an autistic person, sometimes I feel like my disability can be a burden. But I know that I want to make the difference. I want to help preserve these voices, and I will talk about them until I cannot talk about them anymore. And that might be in 10, 20 years from now. Who knows? Or maybe even 100 years. But all I know is that these people mean more to me than anything. But their stories will never be lost because we have their diaries, as well as we have people at the museum, or lovely diary historians such as myself, or educators to keep talking about them till the end of time, and they won't be gone. The thing about people, or should I say politicians, is that they try to erase history. They can't, because we have concrete people, or people like myself, who will never let that happen. These voices will never be erased. They'll always be here, and we will fight for them until we can't anymore.
מפחד כי השם שומר עליי. Hashem siempre está protegiéndome.